This is 1930s Britain. For the first time, black and white films, now in colour. Bringing new life to the good times and the bad.
It's a turbulent decade. The best things happen and the worst things happen.
3 kings in 1 year. The monarchy in crisis. A government gambles everything in a desperate bid to stem the Nazi tide.
Looking back in history, we say, well, how can they not be 360-degree aware of the reality of what they were facing?
This time, it's just 1 year to war. Britain prepares.
Put on your gas mask and keep it on.
And opens its doors to Europe's most vulnerable children.
There's an incredible stoicism about them. Must have been absolutely terrifying.
British children are blissfully ignorant. Until war and evacuation brings its own trauma.
Look at that boy, look at him, he tries to smile there. They don't know what's going to happen to them.
An extraordinary time. This is the 30s in colour. Countdown to war. The summer of 1938 was a great time to be a child in Britain. There were organised outings galore, Punch and Judy shows, and London's Children's Zoo had just opened. A world away from the grown-up worries of war.
Gosh, it's hot.
London Zoo is a fine bit of news for young visitors. I only wish that this had been possible in my young days.
It's the summer months. I can see these days out, moments of just free recreational time. It's so carefree. These are young, innocent children. You can see the excitement, you can see the joy, the simple pleasure of watching a Punch and Judy show. It's ecstatic. And there's nothing on the horizon that would upset this for them at this time. They don't know about any huge political changes or social changes. They're just young children enjoying themselves and being given the opportunity to enjoy themselves, which had been so rare up until before this decade.
There is a sense of optimism. People have got a glimpse of what a better world would be, could be. We could work shorter hours, we could have longer holidays, we could work in clean places, we could build nice schools and hospitals. People are starting to envisage a better, fairer society.
But in a few short months, on the 10th of November 1938, news arrived of Kristallnacht, known as the Night of the Broken Glass. Chamberlain's peace agreement was in peril. For 24 hours, Nazi paramilitary forces and civilians violently targeted and destroyed Jewish homes, businesses and synagogues across Germany.
And Kristallnacht concentrates minds, quite rightly. Lots of things change after that. And it's almost as if the scales fall from people's eyes around the nature of the Nazi regime, which up to that point, you know, people had been trying to appease.
Hitler was increasing the pace of his drive to war in 1938. And part of this then was a mass outbreak of anti-Semitic violence ordered by Hitler 9,000 Jewish-owned shops were trashed in the so-called Night of Broken Glass. About 1,000 synagogues were burnt to the ground. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and put into concentration camps. Many Jewish, dozens and scores of Jewish people were murdered in the course of the Kristallnacht. The official figure was 91, but in fact, I'm sure it was much greater than that. This got very widespread publicity across the world. It's a pretty desperate situation.
When Earl Baldwin broadcast his appeal for Jewish refugees from Germany, thousands of men and women, despoiled of their goods, driven from their homes, seeking sanctuary on our doorstep. These were victims not of any catastrophe of the natural world, but of man's inhumanity to man. Meanwhile, these child refugees from Germany, who have found shelter in Britain, are being cared for and are learning to play a useful part in the nation's work.
The British government supported the humanitarian mission known as Kindertransport. The scheme rescued mainly Jewish children from the dangers of Nazi Germany and Nazi-occupied Austria, and later from Czechoslovakia and Poland. Over the coming months, 10,000 children were allowed into Britain, but they had to leave home without their parents.
You had incredible barriers to prevent adult Jews from getting out of Germany. Everybody in my family knows of the desperation that Jewish parents felt. These are children. Their parents have put them on trains and boats to save them.
Entrepreneur and philanthropist Dame Stephanie Shirley was just 5 years old when she was placed on one of the last Kindertransport trains leaving Vienna. Her birth name was Vera Buchtal.
So I've seen this in black and white, lovely in colour. I remember going onto the ferry, which was at night. I'd never really seen the sea, and there was this black, inky water, and apparently, as I remember, a very small gangplank going up to the sea, sort of somewhat nauseous crossing of the channel from Hook van Holland to Harwich. We all had masses of clothes on because we couldn't bring anything else out, so our parents apparently put us in 2 or 3 coats so that we had... This is in July, so we were wearing as much as we could.
Prior to the crossing, Vera and her 9-year-old sister Renata had a growing awareness of what was going on in Austria and why their mother fought so hard to get them out.
I knew it was a difficult time. My sister was stoned as she left her little school. She had a kind teacher who would let her out early. My sister and I, being half Jewish, half not Jewish, were called crossbreeds, occasionally subhuman, really animal. It was beginning to get quite anti-Semitic. It was a long, long journey. We slept on strips of corrugated cardboard, on the floor, on the benches, and believe it or not, in the overhead luggage racks. Each train had about 1,000 children, aged 5 to 16, with a few 17-year-olds snuck in. And unbelievably, really, there were just 2 adults on the train. So it was fairly bedlamic. There were also some babies and some volunteers who were not eligible to escape from Nazi Europe.
Lily Reichenfeld was one of the volunteers taking care of the young children on Kindertransport.
A non-Jewish friend had guaranteed that she would return to Germany to what she must have known was almost certain death. And she had made 2 such journeys of love, really, had returned to Germany. And then it was Theresienstadt, Auschwitz and oblivion. Courage has many forms. What I do remember very much is arriving at Liverpool Street Station, and that was a grey day. It was silent. 1,000 children were coming off the train after a 2.5-day journey. We were dirty, we were tired. I think we were just so traumatised that it was almost a silent exit. We filed into a very large hall and waited to be claimed, like bits of lost luggage. In a sense, we were. But we were very, very lucky. Our foster parents were lovely, loving people living in the Midlands of England. They didn't speak a word of German. My father had taught us a few words of English, so I could say things like slow combustion stove, very useful for a 5-year-old, but didn't know how to ask to go to the bathroom. We arrived in July the 6th, and when school started in September, our English was good enough for us to go to school. Well, I felt the need to fit in quite quickly, strongly and dramatically. I desperately wanted to assimilate. It's absolutely driven my life. It certainly shaped who I am. But it also gave me very early on the need to justify why I was saved and to make sure that the life that was saved was worth saving.
The rescue of child refugees came at a time when Hitler's military forces were taking control of other nations, and Britain realised it had to prepare for war, like it or not.
People thought that an entire city could be destroyed in a matter of weeks.
You see these pictures of people scurrying about, putting on gas masks, filling up sandbags. It's exactly what happened.
By early spring 1939, Europe was in crisis. Fascist dictator General Franco was about to win the Spanish Civil War with support from Nazi Germany. On the 15th of March, the British government was stunned to learn that Hitler's troops had marched into Prague, forcing the whole of Czechoslovakia to live under Nazi rule.
This was really, really shocking, because it was the absolute tearing up of the Munich Agreement, that agreement which had been brokered between Britain, France, and Germany and Italy in September 1938 and was meant to be a full stop. It was meant to be, Hitler said, his last territorial demand. But here he has invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. This really destroys the policy that has become known by now as appeasement. He's consistently said that his aim is to bring all ethnic Germans within the Reich. He's got the Germans. This is now taking in Czechs. It is all about empire building, and people now begin to realize as they see these clips of the Germans entering Prague that they are dealing with another Napoleon.
The Chamberlain and the cabinet realized immediately in March 1939 that Hitler was now driving towards war, and so the next country on the list was Poland, and so they issued a guarantee to Poland that they would come to Poland's aid if Hitler invaded.
No British government will submit to dictation from a foreign power as to its foreign policy. These mighty armaments of which I speak are not there to threaten anyone, but they are there available to resist aggression or domination.
Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain warned Germany of Britain's guarantee to Poland and that Britain was rearming. The nation realised, whether they wanted to or not, that the whole country would now take an active role to prepare for war. Seen here in this recruitment film for the Air Raid Protection Service in Salford.
This is preparing for a whole new kind of conflict in a whole new way. It's going to be aerial bombardment, potentially poison gas, targeting of civilian populations. You can see that the level of preparation just has to be monumental.
For the first time in British history, civilians on the ground were the likely targets of German bombers. and the ARP wardens would be the first responders.
They were doing such an important job, and they were a first line of defence, really, for the home front. And people who joined the ARP were people who couldn't join up for other services in the main, but wanted to contribute.
Seeing this character on his bike with that armband on in that uniform, that makes me immediately think of Dad's Army, character of the ARP warden, played by Bill Pertwee. All the individuals we see in this clip are men, but there were many women who served as air raid precaution wardens as well, including my granny, Beryl. She was a fire warden and had what must have been an extremely frightening job of going around after air raids. So she was just one of millions of people who had these important but very, very difficult and frightening jobs.
One of the drills the ARP wardens practiced seemed to be what to do in the event of a gas attack, using actors as the poison victims.
Reminds me of those sort of national service adverts for what you do in the case of nuclear war. It's a sort of stage-managed affair, an attempt to create a sort of calm in a very uncalm situation.
Here, I think the guy at the front of the shot doesn't realise that he's still in the shot, possibly. He's taken off the gas mask and doesn't realise that in this scenario he should by now have died from inhaling the poison gas.
In the First World War, there was mustard gas, and people alive at this moment were suffering the effects of mustard gas bombs during the First World War. So that had a very strong reality about it. Would Hitler drop poison gas bombs on Britain? Yes, he could, would, probably would. That's what's behind that.
Tens of millions of gas masks were made, and probably one of the abiding memories for a lot of people who lived through the Second World War is that little cardboard box they had to have all the time close at hand.
I'm reminded of the fact that we had a gas mask in the top cupboard in our house, and I thought it was funny. So I remember putting it on and walking round the house, and my mum, who hardly ever shouted at me, screaming at me and saying, "Take it off." I can just see the look on her face that she thought it was an ugly, terrible thing, not because of how it looked, but what it represented.
As part of its preparations for rearming, British factories up and down the country were now producing war parts. The economy was boosted and employment was on the up.
Today we present dramatic pictures of men labouring night and day, producing the shells for our artillery. And if you think they've got a cushy job at home, you'd better think again.
Filmmakers got busy too. Public information films, designed to prepare the population for danger on the home front, were rolled out in cinemas.
When you hear these warning sirens, take cover at once.
Even now, it's a terrifying wail.
That siren sound, it's just so evocative.
I didn't grow up hearing those sounds in this context, but even I find them quite disturbing to hear.
The warning may also be given by short blasts on police whistles.
People would have paid very close attention to these films because, however bad the subsequent Blitz turned out to be, people in the 1930s thought that it was going to be even worse. People thought that an entire city could be destroyed in a matter of weeks.
Just can't really imagine what that would have been like. I mean, my parents were primary school kids when this was happening, and into their old age would talk about the fear that they felt. That kind of sick kind of feeling in the pit of your stomach, that absolute fear of what's going to happen.
You see these pictures of people scurrying about, putting on gas masks, filling up sandbags. It's exactly what happened, aerial bombing. You know, this is one of the most disgusting, appalling, frightful things that human beings have ever invented.
Shirley Williams was 9 in 1939, living in London.
These films show very much about the gas mask issue, but actually much more important, but for most people, was to have an Anderson shelter in their garden, which meant that the minute that they heard a siren, they would rush into the garden, stay in the shelter. I remember doing that. My job was to carry my mother's cook's daughter, who was only a baby, as fast as I possibly could into the Anderson shelter. My father, at the entry, he would oversee whether there were more indications of further bombing to come. So you got this kind of private world of protection, but not one that was quite as advanced or as sophisticated as you would have got much later in the war.
If you are provided with a steel shelter and have not erected it, do so at once.
It was extremely flimsy. It might protect you against the blast if your house was bombed, but you couldn't expect much in the way of safety from a direct hit.
Do not use the telephone except for very short, urgent messages.
I'm sorry, the number's still engaged. But Tweed. No, not Tweed, darling.
Even though this film was clearly made to show what life might be like, what actually happened when war came, there's moments where we think, really? When you look at the woman on the telephone eating the chocolates because she's been on the phone for ages chatting to her friend, it's very stereotypical.
Think of my line. I'm so sorry, the number's still engaged.
You may be causing delay to vital calls.
By the summer of 1939, as Britain prepared for war, life, for the most part, continued as normal.
I guess you can't live in a state of high alert. And maybe some of this keep calm and carry on idea is the only way people can get through something which is terrifying.
What else could you do? You had to carry on as usual, otherwise everything would have fallen apart.
By the summer of 1939, with war looming, the British public is instructed to carry on, that whatever happens, Britain is a nation prepared. So up and down the country, ordinary life continued as normal.
They went to the cinema, they read books, newspapers, enjoyed everything, enjoyed Butlins holiday camps and so on. We can imagine that the greater the threat of disaster, war, of death, of bombing, of losing loved ones, the more intense the emotional experiences, the more intense a pleasure you might take in your freedom and your moments of enjoyment when you feel them so much under threat.
By this time, some could afford their own movie cameras, which allowed them to record those everyday moments of pleasure and freedom, like this family in Delamere Forest, Cheshire.
Happy-looking family picnic. Always wear your tie, even on a picnic.
She eating a stick of celery. He's getting his hair slicked back, bit of Brill cream on there.
He had his comb put under his nose as if he was doing an impression of Hitler. I mean, a lot of the British people did think that Hitler was a lunatic, a sinister lunatic.
It's funny the way this terror of Hitler is kind of diverted into a joke. So we've got the famous song, Hitler has only got one ball. Goering has two but very small. Himmler is very similar, and poor old Goebbels has no balls at all. Now, what does that represent, apart from the vulgarity of it, is that these people, we will castrate them in the song, we will make them less fearful than they are.
It's to, not necessarily to humanize the enemy, but to make the enemy less serious. And if they're being mocked, then they cannot be that serious. And therefore, if they're not that serious, we'll be okay. Life will go on. Keep calm, carry on.
In Northampton, Wynne Bassett-Loke and his wife Jane were also home movie enthusiasts. Their great-niece Jane remembers them fondly.
My memory very much is of him never sitting still. My aunt was forever saying, "Oh, come and sit down, Win." And he'd sit down for 2 or 3 seconds and then bounce up again and say, "Oh, I need to go and get so-and-so," and off he'd go.
Uncle Win was a successful toy maker whose company specialised in producing model railways with trains large and small. A skill that was, surprisingly, to prove vital for Britain in the war years ahead. Bassetlope Garden Railways featured in newly emerging theme parks, like Beaconscot, the famous 1930s model village in Buckinghamshire.
He really was Mr. Tomorrow's man. He was always full of new ideas and didn't talk down to us as children. He would invite us to come and see whatever his latest new acquisition was, and you sort of felt excited by him. He liked making films. It's lovely to see the colour. This would be one of his projects to show how good a town Northampton is. He was involved in the design and planning of new proper municipal indoor baths, and it was him who wanted them to be Art Deco and really rather special and full Olympic length.
With the success of his company, Win Bassetlope commissioned German architect Peter Behrens to design his home in Northampton, England's first modernist house.
New Ways was such a different house from any of the other houses I visited. There was this lovely tiled hallway you went into, and because it had a flat roof, it looked different. Back in the 1930s, we didn't lock front doors during the day, and Tortoise sat on a little table near the door, so when you went to visit at New Ways, you'd open the front door and you would go and you would ring Tortoise.
The Bassetlope Company was commissioned for the war effort, creating important scale models of Bailey bridges for the Royal Engineers, and later working models of Mulberry Harbour, which would prove invaluable during the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944.
This was my wartime secret, which for years I never told anyone, because we'd always been drilled during the war that careless talk costs lives, and we didn't talk about it. And as young children, somehow you did pick up anxiety.
With war on the horizon, holidays were a welcome distraction. In Wales, the Salford Lads Club were taking their annual camping trip. It was something they looked forward to all year round, and the 1939 trip to Aberystwyth was no exception. These teenagers didn't know their lives would change so dramatically. For some, it would be the last carefree time of their lives.
We still do this to this day, jumping off the rocks, but the costumes are a little bit different. I'd imagine they were all made of wool, though. Yeah, you'd get them wet and the costume would
drop down.
expose one they shouldn't. The sausage look a bit... nothing changes.
Well, they still complain about the food, though, don't they? They still have to wash up their own gear, don't they?
They had to wash their own gear, and for the best orderlies, for washing pots and for tidying up, they'd get a prize for that. The blankets there that the lads are folding there, those would be army blankets from the First World War, probably.
Camping trips like this one in Wales were especially important to growing lads coming away from dangerous industrial areas.
When we get into the 1930s here, we're talking about a very polluted environment, aren't we? I mean,
that was the other one.
You know, didn't you have to, like a lot of people, you ended up in a TB hospital?
Yeah.
Well, I did. I had pneumonia when I was growing up, so these mill towns are just full of sooty atmosphere. So going into the countryside, it's a powerful thing, is the camp. It had lots of kind of levels to it. He looks very familiar. That actually does look like Clifford I think that
You
looks
think
a
it
bit
is?
like Clifford Seddon.
Clifford Seddon enjoyed camp life with his friends so much that he'd already signed up for the 1940 camp the next year, even though war loomed ever closer.
Although it was a very dark time, I suppose, it was still, you know, we're going to go next year. So the idea of this suddenly coming to a halt was extremely, difficult for kids.
Everybody thought it was going to be next year, 1940, because we actually set camp up for 1940.
When that camp was cancelled, Clifford Seddon signed up to the RAF, aged just 16. In March 1944, he would be killed in a Lancaster bomber on a mission over Frankfurt.
Places like Salford Lads Club, which offered a place for young men and boys to learn to sort of get involved in recreational activities such as boxing and football. They were given a space outside their particularly hard lives to just be boys and be lads and keep out of trouble in a way. You can see the joy on their faces, and it just makes you feel quite happy that if they do go to war and if they're about to have their whole lives upturned and changed, that they've experienced a day just full of simple joy and simple pleasures like this.
As soon as I came through the door, it seemed to me like one of the most special places I'd ever seen.
You were waiting to get to the age of 13 so that you could join. And like, you come through the door and games to play. It was something that every boy in the area looked forward to doing, joining Salford Lads Club. It was the place to be. Long may it continue.
By the late summer of 1939, the tents of Salford Lads Club had long been packed away. English cricket fans endured the rain cheerfully. The Test series against the West Indies was going their way. But due to the imminent outbreak of war, the cricket was suddenly abandoned. War is yet to be declared, but the government orders a frantic major-scale evacuation, sending millions of children and adults out of cities. Destination unknown.
We children were told, oh, it's all going to be over by Christmas, and it's a big adventure anyway.
Always remember the gas mask. Hang on to your gas mask.
On the 1st of September 1939, news arrived that Hitler's armed forces had invaded Poland in the early hours of the morning. Propaganda showed a Britain prepared.
If evidence of readiness for war is the sole remaining hope of peace, all bear witness that if war comes, we shall not be found wanting.
Troops were mobilized as Britain and France agreed a 48-hour hiatus before the official declaration of war. With German bombers capable of flattening entire cities and their civilians, the British nation pulled together as never before. The government commenced Operation Pied Piper, the biggest mass movement in British history. In just 3 days, 3.5 million people were evacuated, including nearly 1 million unaccompanied children, sent from towns and cities across Britain to the countryside.
These parents have not met the people who are receiving their children. They are entrusting their children, perhaps forever, to strangers. It's the most incredible thing.
Look at that boy, look at him, he tries to smile there. You know, they don't know what's going to happen to them.
These little children being given their cups of tea or possibly cocoa. Hot drink is the answer to emotional trauma. Waving their handkerchiefs, steaming out of the British city into the British countryside.
Well, look at their eyes. All these separations imposed by war. So that's what you can see on their faces, separation. It's such a powerful thing. Look, there's a girl, look at her hand, clinging onto a mum's coat and putting her head next to her mum's chest. She wants to be with her mum, and his mum's upset as well. But she's been told by authorities this is safe. And in a way, the authorities are right. A lot of people were killed in the cities, and these children who went, if they went to the countryside, they survived.
Many of us will have parents and grandparents who went through this in some way and were emotionally affected for life by it.
Children living near the River Thames in London were considered high risk and were first in line for evacuation. Pat, aged 8, was living near the Woolwich Arsenal. George, aged 9, just a few miles down the road in Belvedere. To them, this footage stirs up strong memories of that journey.
This takes me back, and it's in colour too. They're carrying their cases and their pillowcases. Some of them carried stuff in pillowcases.
I think I had a little bag. Carried a bag and a gas mask. I can always remember the gas mask. Hang on to your gas mask. Wonder where the hell we was going.
That morning, we went round to the school. I was evacuated with my mother and my small sister under the Mothers and Babies scheme, and we went round to Woodhill School in Woolwich. We had our labels tied on us, and apparently I stamped my foot and had a tantrum because I said I wasn't a piece of luggage and didn't want to have a label tied on me.
Yes, mate. Crowd with children, all pushing and shoving and pushed onto the coach. Go on, get on, get on, get on. Then we was all fighting to get to the window to look back again to say ta-da. You know. I can remember one elder sister, Winnie, she come to wave us bye-bye. She was crying, that's right.
We didn't know where we were going. The trains just went. You took with you a special toy, and this is Ted, and he was given to me by my dad. He's very special, especially as my father's submarine was sunk during the war. I wouldn't part with him for anything.
That's me looking out the window, watching the world go by. We stopped a couple of times, but I remember that some had sandwiches. I don't think we had sandwiches. We only had to rely on the sandwiches we got from the people at the station, and they passed the sandwiches through the window. Getting a drink.
They were giving out brown paper bags with iron rations in them, tins of corned beef and tins of milk and packets of biscuits and nuts and raisins and a big bar of chocolate. You can imagine what the children did with the chocolate. I knew that war meant fighting and that the grown-ups were worried, but we children were told, oh, it's all going to be over by Christmas and it's a big adventure anyway.
That's when they all got out. Cars and coaches, and it was all distributed. You going there, you're going there, go with that, go with them. And we was the last ones, us 5, and we got in 2 different cars.
Pat's evacuation journey would take her to a grocer's shop in Kent and then on to Wales. George would settle on a farm near Barnstable in Devon, where he'd learn many new skills from the farmer's nephew, Reg.
I used to go with him ploughing, digging potatoes. That's another laugh, that was. He'd ploughing up potatoes, Roll Prince one day, and we'd be on picking all his potatoes up. And back-aching job that is. Oh, he taught me everything I knew. That's why I missed him, I think.
Children in those days used to play out in the street, but when we were evacuated, there were fields to run and play in, and the river and the woods, and it was so different.
I cried when I come home. I think I cried all the way. Oh, forget it. I loved evacuee. Oh, I loved it.
On Sunday, the 3rd of September, Chamberlain learned that Britain's final ultimatum to Hitler to withdraw from Poland had been ignored. He prepared to make the most important radio announcement of his life.
We were in a very beautiful rural part of Britain, the New Forest, and my brother and I were playing in the garden. I remember it was full of red admiral butterflies floating over the garden. My mother shouted to us, "You must come and hear the Prime Minister." We were told because completely silent, which we were.
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed.
I remember he sounded like quite an old man. He sounded broken, really. His voice was broken, and his style was not one of, military victory. On the contrary, it was one of disaster. And he talked about the war, and he talked about how inevitable it was and how hard he had tried to avoid it and stop it.
The situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted, and no people or country could feel itself safe, had become intolerable.
My mother broke into tears, and we began to realize that something terrible had happened, even if we didn't understand very well what it was.
I remember my parents talking about it in a kind of depressed way, that everything had failed. That's what war is.
And now that we have resolved to finish it, I know that you will all play your part with calmness and courage.
Shortly after the announcement, the first air raid siren in wartime Britain was heard. As the blackout began, so did a new era, as Britain stepped towards an uncertain future.
The 1930s was not always a preparation for war. It was also a preparation for peace. Even though we think of it as the decade preparing for war, most ordinary people were not concerned with war until war actually affected them.
Only good thing that came out of it was that no one would go back to the poverty of the 1930s and the depression that was on the flip side of what was known as a prosperous and socially liberating decade.
The 30s is such a divided decade, and you see those contradictions being played out, and it's no wonder we're now looking back to the 30s to try and understand more about our own situation and some of the threats that we're currently engaging with or facing.
We get this emotional, vivid sense of life in the 1930s in all its human, colourful glory. Suddenly there's this coming alive of sensation and putting the emotions back into history and putting the colour back into films is really very much the same experience. It makes people seem closer to us. It makes it easier for us to feel that they might have been feeling things that we can recognise.
We humans have history. And history isn't something that's separate from us. History is in us.